Talk to me about how much marketing actually goes into getting your book onto a bestseller list.
Yeah, so I blame Hollywood for that picture because anytime you see an author on TV or in a movie, they're at a desk all by themselves. They've got their typewriter, there's a stack of pages next to it. They finish up that book and they mail it off to their agent, and then they're kind of done until the next one. They don't tell you any of the other stuff that happens. I write first thing in the morning, like getting the words. I tell my daughter I got to make the words. She's 7. That's my bread and butter. So I wake up first thing in the morning. I sit down at my desk. I turn off the internet. I don't want any kind of distractions. And I get about 2 to 3 words on whatever my latest project is. I usually wrap that up about 10:30, 11 o'clock in the morning. Then I flip the switch on the internet, and that's when the rest of this business basically comes flowing into my inbox.
Welcome to another episode of From Startup to Wunderbrand with Nicholas Kuhner.
Now, you all know I love having authors on the show, and do I have an author for you? With the privilege of speaking to J.D. Barker, a literary powerhouse whose name is synonymous with gripping suspense, edge-of-your-seat thrills, and mind-bending storytelling. He is an international best-selling author whose works masterfully blend elements of horror, crime, mystery, science fiction, and the supernatural. His debut novel, Forsaken, captivated readers and earned him a Bram Stoker Award nomination, even catching the attention of legendary Stephen King. From co-authoring Dracula, a prequel to Dracula based on Bram Stoker's original notes, to collaborating with James Patterson, J.D.'s career is a testament to his ability to push creative boundaries and redefine genres. Beyond the accolades, J.D. brings a wealth of experience from his journey as a journalist, ghostwriter, and book doctor, insights that have shaped him into one of the most dynamic storytellers of our time. He's not just a writer, he's a creator of worlds that stay with you long after you've turned the last page. So today we're going to touch on JD's creative process, but focus a lot on transition from indie to traditional publishing and what it takes to craft stories that resonate on a global scale. So JD, welcome.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So you've got 2 books that we're going to tell about, because there is the artistic side, which is the writing side, but then there's the second side, which is actually getting things done, and the marketing and the entrepreneurial side of writing. So you've got 2 books here that we're going to touch on quickly. One is From Books to Business Success, which is where you talk about how your writing career has opened doors to new ventures, so collaborations with new publishers, to adapting your work to films and television. And secondly, the creative business magic of co-authoring. And this is where you look at the advantages of partnering with other writers and sharing tips on navigating the creative process to build successful co-authoring partnerships. And I've seen a couple of your books, you've got 2 names on them. So I see the one behind you, Heavy Stones,
It's called Heavy Are the Stones. I wrote it with a woman named Christine Daigle, who's a neuropsychologist, which is why I brought her in on the project. As an author, I'm literally getting paid to make stuff up. So I can fake my way through just about anything. I do a bunch of Google searches and research material and pretend to be an astronaut, pretend to be a police detective. But what I found is if I partner up with somebody who's actually got that knowledge base behind them and work with them on the fiction, it brings this completely different set of authenticity to the book, something that I couldn't do on my own. Christine in her day life is a neuropsychologist. So she was able to bring that entire skill set to the book and take it to another level.
I suppose 2 minds are better than one. And you bring up a very important point in terms of writers and musicians in particular are like alchemists. You literally create money out of nothing because you are writing words that, are not solid. It's a wonderful way to make money if you can make money as a writer. So my father is an author and my grandfather is a best-selling author as well. And, the difference between a best-selling author and somebody who's sold 10 books it's a huge continuum. So let's talk a little bit about From Books to Business Success. And I've interviewed a lot of folks who have been in number 1 spots on the Amazon bestseller list. So if you have the category on, let's see what nice category we can think about. Paranormal, janitorial, supplies, that could potentially be a category. And if you write a book on that, you can be in the number 1 on that. Talk to me about maybe how your first book got you on the radar of publishers, and how that sort of changed your writing trajectory from being a ghostwriter or from being a journalist to being a full-fledged writer?
Yeah, so everything just kind of evolved. So you touched on a lot of my background. So I was a journalist in college. I basically wrote a lot of interviews up. I worked with a lot of recording artists and people in the music industry. And I would interview them, and I would basically write up, somebody like Madonna and sell that to 5 or 6 different magazines or newspapers. And that's kind of where I got my start. And when you work in newspapers and magazines, everybody that you meet, you quickly realize they've got a novel at some stage of development in a desk drawer somewhere. It's 500,000 words long. They've been working on it for 10 years. It's almost done, but it needs a little something. And I kind of became the go-to guy they would hand those off to. Initially, it was because I was just very good with grammar and punctuation. I could just clean up the manuscript, but I started giving them feedback on how to develop the story. And that's kind of where I got my informal training in all this, off the backs of other people. I was working in the corporate world for 2 decades. I was told you can't make a living as a writer. You have to get a real job. So I got 2.5 degrees. I ended up working in finance, but I would come home at night and I would work on these other projects. And just over time, I basically learned what the folks in New York were looking for in a book, what sold and what didn't. So when it came time to write my first novel, which is called Forsaken, I had all this knowledge behind me. I basically knew how to write a best-selling book, or what I felt would be a best-selling book. But what I didn't have was a handle on the marketing side, which is the business end of this whole thing that you touched on. I got extremely lucky. King read the manuscript before it was published, and he gave me his permission to use some of his characters in it. That was a big leg up, because when the press got a hold of that and started writing that up, that's essentially what lit the fuse on the book. Newspapers started writing about it, Publishers Weekly, trade publications, so libraries started picking it up, bookstores started picking it up. And once that happened, it got in the hands of readers, and the writing was solid. And then I picked up word of mouth. And that's really the only way I think you can sell books. You can spend as much money as you want on marketing. You can try this, you can try that, but word of mouth is really what takes it to that bestseller level.
And there's no recipe for creating word of mouth, really. It's really luck of the draw sometimes. Well, being at the right place at the right time and having something good that people want to read, obviously. I want to talk a little bit about the change. I mean, you mentioned you started out in finance and journalism. You are now having to be a almost full-time marketer. I think a lot of people who are writing authors and are in the creative field think, I'm going to write this book, and then magically it is going to go onto television and it is going to go onto the New York bestseller list. Talk to me about how much marketing actually goes into getting your book onto a bestseller list.
Yeah, so I blame Hollywood for that picture, because anytime you see an author on TV or in a movie, they're at a desk all by themselves. They've got their typewriter, there's a stack of pages next to it. They finish up that book and they mail it off to their agent, and then they're kind of done until the next one. They don't tell you any of the other stuff that happens. I write first thing in the morning, like getting the words. I tell my daughter I got to make the words. She's 7. That's my bread and butter. So I wake up first thing in the morning. I sit down at my desk. I turn off the internet. I don't want any kind of distractions. And I get about 2 to 3 words on whatever my latest project is. I usually wrap that up about 10:30, 11 o'clock in the morning. Then I flip the switch on the internet, and that's when the rest of this business basically comes flowing into my inbox. I'm in 150 different countries, about 30 different languages. For every one of those countries, I put out one book. It's in 150 different places. They don't necessarily release at the same time. I've got books that I wrote 10 years ago that are coming out as brand new today in other places. So you have to manage all of that. It can be overwhelming. I mean, when I first started doing this and that started to happen, I would do interviews at 11 o'clock at night, 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning to accommodate all these local time zones. But I quickly realized I was going to burn out trying to keep that kind of pace. So in today's world, I write full time, but I have my quitting bell rings at 3 o'clock. I close everything down. I leave my office. I go for a run and relax and spend the rest of the night with my wife and daughter. And I've had to create that kind of balance just to survive. I'm coming up on my 10-year anniversary now as a full-time author. And I think a lot of it has to do with, figuring out what your limitations are and figuring out how to pace yourself. And also just how to enjoy it. It's a fantastic career, but you can easily dominate 24 hours out of the day if you let it. So you need to be able to take a step back.
Absolutely. That balance is important. And it's difficult having a family and being an author, I guess, because once you get to a certain level of what's the correct word here? Awareness in the market. I mean, you don't own yourself anymore, because you can be at book clubs, you can be doing webinars, you can be doing signings. You could keep yourself busy 24 hours a day, right?
Oh, absolutely. I turn stuff down all the time, things that I would love to do. But just because I look at the calendar, I'm like, I just, unless I can come up with 27 hours in a day, it's just not going to happen. The hardest part about this job is learning how to say no.
If you look at the future of your writing, have you sort of set in your head how many books left you've got in you? Because I've done an exercise recently where there are a whole bunch of things I wanted to do. I wanted to write an opera. I wanted to play XYZ piano concerto. I wanted to go and do XYZ. And I did a calculation sort of backwards. I thought, okay, I'll probably live to 85. That's the general age of my family. And how good can I get? How long is it going to take me to be a good pianist, a good opera singer, a good XYZ? And I realized I just don't have enough hours in the day to make that happen. I've got to cut away the things I don't want to do, that I'm not going to get to, and just focus on a couple of things. So it's only like 1,020 months up, or 1,200, something like that, months that I've got left to do. Have you sort of said to yourself how many books you've got left in you? Have you got some kind of bigger picture of what you are going to leave behind one day?
That sounds like a horrible way to use math. Now, part of me wants to hit the pause button and go at my desk and actually figure this out. But no, I mean, I've got a document on my phone. I use a program called Simple Note to take notes. And I've got one basically just for ideas. Anytime I get any kind of idea, it could be a sentence, I drop it in there. There is so much material in there, I could probably go for the next couple 100 years and not finish. Realistically, I can personally write about 3 to 4 books a year at the pace that I write, that 2,000 to 3,000 words a day that I mentioned. For me, that's not enough, because I do have a lot more stories that I want to tell. And, for better or worse, when I paired up with James Patterson and we started working together, not only has he taught me a ton on the creative and the writing side, but I picked his brain on the business side. I've learned the benefits of working with co-authors to the point where I'm starting a co-authored book line of my own, because it allows me to take some of these ideas. I can go down that list and I can say, I love this idea, but it's number 17 out of the next 20 that I want to write. But I could bring in somebody else and I could work on it with them and I could get it out in the next year. So it allows me to expand my business model and also tackle a lot of those other projects. So I don't know if that would work in your world. You can't really get somebody else to learn piano for you. But you can divide and conquer on a lot of other things.
Exactly. Well, this takes me back to one of your childhood heroes, I guess, which is Dixon, the Hardy Boys, who was
Sure.
who's the person who wrote that? D.W. Dixon or something like that, who wrote the Hardy Boys. Now, the Hardy Boys,
Yeah.
that was started off written by the one author, and then it became so popular that, like you said, the kernel of the idea was given to somebody and the structure, and off you go and write that book. And this is not new. Michelangelo did the same thing. If we look at Rembrandt, if we look at a whole bunch of these famous artists, they basically had their acolytes, but their apprentices who learned their process, learned their brushstroke style, etc., and were the next ones to take on, were able to finish these much bigger projects. And I think it's a very smart way of looking at how can you get all of those, 300 years worth of book ideas you've got out there. Now, let's talk a little bit. I want to go back a little bit into the marketing side. I see you quite strong on Twitter. There's a lot of action there and in a couple of languages. And I suppose unless you speak Spanish, I take it you've either got a translator or also learned how to use ChatGPT to translate things really well. Talk to me about which channels are working best for you. And are there any digital marketing channels that you think authors should keep their eye on or utilize if they want to build up a community?
Well, I'm going to let you in on a dirty little secret on the author side of this business. So I've got 18 different Facebook accounts. I've got multiple Twitter accounts, all for my name, but in different languages for different countries.
Okay.
I don't manage that myself. I work with a third-party company that specializes in this for authors kind of in the same position as me. So when I want to put out a personal message on Twitter, they see that and then they'll take it and reshare it all these other platforms in the other languages on my behalf, or we can schedule things. Which is, when you're in so many different places, you have to figure out how to multiply it out. I couldn't personally sit down and do all of that. And honestly, I don't even know if social media even works to sell books. They're still trying to figure that out. I remember when The Fourth Monkey was being shopped to publishers, which was my second thriller. We had, I think, 5 or 6 different publishers that wanted that. And every phone call that I had with one of those publishers, like the first or second question out of their mouth was, what does your social media presence look like? They wanted to know how many followers I had on all these different platforms. But, in today's world, they still don't know whether it sells books. From my standpoint, I look at all of this as a business. I'm not necessarily selling a book. I'm selling a widget, so I have to take that widget. I have to get it out in front of people. So when a new social media platform comes out, I immediately run out. I make sure I reserve my name. So I'm at J.D. Barker pretty much on everything. And I may sit on it. I may try to use it. Sites like Snapchat, I still haven't figured out. When TikTok started taking off for books, I looked at what people were doing to sell books on. Nobody wants to see me holding my book up, dancing in front of a camera. So I created a company called Best of Book. I hired some people to put together a list of book talk influencers. These were people that were pushing books on TikTok. We ended up getting about 3,000 of them together. And once a week, I have a mailing list that goes out to that group, and I work with all the traditional publishers. They provide ARC copies, which are advanced reader copies of upcoming titles, to my company. My company puts those titles in front of the influencers, and those influencers can pick those titles and review them if they want to. So at this point, we've got about 3,000 influencers on that list. They have millions and millions of followers between them. So anytime I want to promote one of my own books, I can put it on my own list and put it in front of that group and let them do the heavy lifting, which is way more effective than me trying to manage, a TikTok profile on my own. So, I approach all these scenarios, kind of in that same vein. I look at it, is this something I can do on my own? Is it something I want to do on my own? And if not, I find some other way to get it done.
You've touched on a lot of the channels, but Facebook and Facebook groups, do you use that at all?
There's a couple Facebook groups that I personally belong to that I'll check in with. But for the most part, a lot of it's automated and it's done through these third-party companies. There's just not enough, time in the day. I could easily go down the Facebook rabbit hole. I could spend 8 hours a day there if I wanted to. And it would be fun, but it's not productive. I need to be making those works.
One of my, I like fantasy books. So there's a chap called Raymond E. Feast who is quite a good fantasy writer, and he's got a strong presence on Facebook, and has used that quite successfully to keep in touch with his community, launch new books, etc. So it's I think for younger authors, I think that's quite a good way, because it's quite an engaging platform for books. Now, the second thing that you should be talking about is, how do you get a book adapted to film or television? And how does that process work? I've gone through it with one of my grandfather's books into a cartoon, and that process was quite hair-wrenching. But maybe talk to me about how the process works with getting your book picked up for film or television.
Yeah, I've got 8 different books in what I call various stages of Hollywood hell. They've been optioned. This one's got a director. This one's got a showrunner. Each one of them kind of got to that point in a different way. So there's no right or wrong way to do it. I've got a film and TV agent that takes all of my projects out. Anytime I write a new book, we create what's called a lookbook, which is kind of like a PowerPoint presentation. It's like a little 5 to 10 page document that summarizes the whole thing, because nobody in Hollywood actually reads a book. They rarely even read a script. You need something quick and dirty that you can put in front of a group at a conference meeting, or, shoot over it after a phone call or whatever. So I've been lucky, and a lot of those have been optioned, but nothing's been made. I know Dan Brown pretty well. He lives down the street from me, Da Vinci Code and a bunch of other movies that took off. He told me once, if you watch the credits at the end of a movie, all those names that are mentioned, every one of those people has to be there, or had to be there, in order for that film to make it to the screen. You take one of those names out and it completely falls apart. To give you an example, I've got a book called A Caller's Game. And I purposely wrote this one, thinking I want to write a book that can't be filmed, because everything I had written to that point had been optioned. And I'm like, I just want to see if I can write something that Hollywood doesn't pick up. So I wrote this book. I blow up half of New York in the book. I'm like, there's no way they're going to be able to film this. And when we were shopping the book to publishers, we got a phone call from Ridley Scott's company. They're like, we want this. We're going to make this. So Scott Free picked up the book. About a month or two later, we got another phone call. Jennifer Garner likes the book. She wants to star in this movie. Jennifer Garner has what's called a first look deal with Netflix, which basically means she takes any project she's interested in Netflix, and they get the first refusal on it. Netflix got involved. They liked it. They greenlit $100 million budget. All of this stuff happened within about 3 weeks. Then on like the fourth week, we got another phone call. Jennifer Garner has to pull out because of scheduling conflicts. That means Netflix went away. That means the $100 million budget went away. And we're right back where we started from. And that's essentially the Hollywood roller coaster. That has happened with every one of my books over and over again. How they get to that point, like you never know. My last one was called Behind a Closed Door. It's an erotic thriller. It's been dubbed 50 Shades meets David Fincher's The Game. When we were shopping that to the publishers, we started getting phone calls from the folks in Hollywood. One of the things that people don't talk about a whole lot is there's these low-level employees at publishing houses that get paid by the folks in Hollywood to read books. And if they hear, buzz, or if they feel a book is film worthy, they notify the folks in Hollywood, and that kind of gets them involved. They're called scouts. So essentially that's what happened. The editors were reading the book. They're like, this could make a great movie. Those scouts picked up the phone. They called the guys in Hollywood. And then we started getting phone calls from Netflix, from Sony, from HBO, all the typical players. And that's the second time that kind of scenario has played out. I have another book that was picked up just because it was on NetGalley. A production studio read it on NetGalley, and they jumped, to the head of the line. They got ahead of everybody because it wasn't even at publisher yet, or wasn't published yet. It wasn't out. You have to have a film and TV agent, I guess, is probably the only common thread in all of it. You need somebody who can play middleman in all of this. And, even saying that, I've got friends that have had stuff that has been optioned even without having an agent. But it's very helpful to have an agent. If you go back 5 years ago, the folks in Hollywood wouldn't touch anything if it wasn't through a traditional publisher, and those lines are completely blurry now. They don't seem to care. If it's a good story, they're all over it.
It's fascinating, and it's a decent side revenue stream as well if you do get those options, which is quite.
That's another one of those things people don't talk about. Like, if a book gets optioned, they pay you for that option. They're basically paying you for the opportunity to make that film or TV show. And there's a timeline attached to it. So they're paying you, X dollars for 18 months, for 24 months. If it doesn't happen in that time frame, they've got to either renew that option, or you can hold it back up and put it, and somebody else will bid on it. And the nice thing about all that is once something's been optioned, it's kind of a known commodity in Hollywood. So if that option expires and the initial company doesn't want it, there's usually a couple other people in line that are all over it. So you can keep that going. And like those option payments alone are very lucrative. Once they start principal photography, there's usually benchmarks built into your contract. So as each little step happens, you get a little bit more and a little bit more. But you make a decent living just from stuff. It doesn't have to actually get made. It's fantastic, I'm sure, if it does. But at this point, I have nothing that's actually been filmed. But because I've got so much activity on that side, I earn a decent amount of money, annually just from that.
When we talk about publishing, we typically think about books, but the environment has changed quite a lot from actual publishing to audiobooks and to ebooks. Where are you seeing the majority of your sales coming through? And are you seeing a bit of a change in the industry? Because you've obviously got physical print, hardcovers, ebooks, and audiobooks. Where is the majority, if I can ask, of your sort of revenue coming from?
Well, I've always, whether I indie publish something or I go through a traditional publisher, I always make sure it comes out in all the possible formats. So it always comes out as a hardcover, an ebook, and an audiobook. Sometimes we do a paperback at the same time. Sometimes we wait on the paperback. But these different groups, they're read by different people, so you want to hit everybody that you possibly can. I've seen the largest amount of growth probably in audio over the last 10 years. That one's by far grown further than any of the other ones. Ebooks came out of the gate very strong, but then when I started getting published through the traditional market, which focuses on print, I started seeing my indie titles start selling in print, on par with what I was selling on ebooks. In today's world, I see a lot of people going back to print. And I think a lot of it has to do with the social media influencers, because when they record a video, they tend to use the book as a prop. They hold up that physical hardcover or paperback in their video. And I think because the people watching it see that physical book, it makes them want that physical book. But I've seen a substantial increase in print over the last handful of years. It's on par with Book Talk taking off. So that I don't think that's a coincidence. I'm always looking for new streams too. I think sooner or later we're going to see something related to augmented reality, VR headsets. There's going to be something new. I mean, ebook kind of came out, and that's really the last big innovation we've had. But I'm sure we're going to see something different sometime soon. Right now, I'm watching all the advances with AI. I think in a couple of years, you're going to be able to pick up an audiobook and you're going to be able to tell that audiobook that I wanted to be read by a British female that's 42 years old. You're going to be able to dictate who your narrator is.
Yeah, it's quite sad. My grandfather was paralyzed in an armed robbery at his work and had to rely on audiobooks. And the quality of those audiobooks was so terrible, and not all the books were available, and it was on tapes. So also with, limited mobility, changing tapes, and that was a bit of a disaster. And obviously you had to have somebody read these books, and it's a library. So you had to wait for that book to come in. So I just wish he'd been around to be able to have all of what the world has to offer in terms of audiobooks available so easily. So we are living in really great times where we do have so many options. If I can ask one last thing about you, and it's going to be about brand. How important do you take branding, and how have you sort of built your personal brand? It's quite a broad question, so if you want me to narrow it down, I can, but talk about your personal branding and how you do that specifically as an author.
Yeah, so brand to me is probably one of the most important things. I mean, you have to write 5-star books. I think it has to be a good book. That's kind of a given. I mean, at this point, like even if you have that, you may or may not succeed, but you need to have that. You won't succeed without it. But brand to me, like my name is actually trademarked. Like I pulled a trademark on my name very early to make sure that I had that. I fought every one of my publishers, from an early stage to make sure my name was as large on every title, every cover as possible. Because they will go the other route. Like when you're brand new, they put the title nice and big and your name is super small. If you look at any of my solo titles now, my name is pretty large. Even with my books with James Patterson, he's the #1 bookseller in the world, best-selling author. In my contract, it says my name has to be the same size as his. I'm very, very, I think about that all the time. Yes, I think you have to approach this as a business too, which is when you're an author, you're introverted. Most authors tend to, want to just be at a desk all by themselves and not interact with people in any way whatsoever. But you have to be able to take that hat off at some point and flip it and put on a marketing hat. When you put on that marketing hat, you have to realize you're selling a product and you have to approach it that way. What can I do to sell this product? What do I have to do? If you buy a box of macaroni and cheese at the grocery store, Kraft, is huge up at the top of that box. That's no accident. They want you to get that name embedded in your brain. They want it to stick there. From an author standpoint, it shouldn't be any different. The more often people see your name, the more likely they are to pick up that book.
Absolutely. And I guess the last thing I should ask is, for young authors who got a book in the works, what kind of word of advice, I know this is horribly cliche, but what kind of word of advice can you give to any young authors trying to create a name for themselves?
I think the #1 thing that everybody's got to focus on is just try to write every single day. Writing to me is very much like going to the gym. It's like working on a muscle. If you go every day, you're going to get stronger. You're going to get better at it. You're going to improve. If you only do it on Saturdays, if you only do it every other week, if you only dedicate 15 minutes on Thursdays, you're not going to get it done. You can tell people you're a writer, but it's, you'll never get to the finish line. If you could write every day, knock out 200 to 300 words, that's a novel within a year. You're still gonna have to make a lot of changes to it. Your voice is going to change over that time. You have to go back through and clean it up. But you'll get to the finish line for that first. For most people, you have to write, anywhere from 300 to 500,000 words before you even find your own voice. It's that 10,000 hours of practice that you need for pretty much any task to learn it. If you want to learn piano, you're going to have to put 10,000 hours in there.
I looked at it and I realized I didn't have enough time, so I cut it out. So
that's it. Yeah. So writing is the same thing. For me, like I wrote, for fun when I was a kid. Like this has always been my hobby. It's always been my go-to. I can't imagine not writing. It nags at me to the point where I feel like I have to do it every day and I enjoy it. If you're forcing yourself to put your butt in that chair to write, if it's a career for you.
JD, where can I send folks to find out more about your books if they haven't read them, and find out about these 2 books we've spoken about, From Books to Business Success and The Creative Business Magic of Co-authoring?
The easiest place to find me is jdbarker.com or any bookstore.
Fantastic. Well, JD, this has been a pleasure, and I look forward to reading your next books. I've got to go back into the back catalog now and start from scratch. So next time we chat, I'll give you my feedback. How's that?
Perfect. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Been great. Thank you.